Well, another week and another bad poll for the Prime Minister, this time from Mainstreet Research, saying not only is Trudeau's personal popularity testing, quote, new depths in the country, Liberals are also now trailing Conservatives in Quebec. So to talk about this is our political panel, Susan Smith, Principal at the Blue Sky Strategy Group, Tim Powers, Chairman of Summa Strategies, and Anne McGrath, the National Director for the NDP. Hello to the three of you.
Hello. Michael.
Hi. I'm going to get you to start us off here, Anne, because when you look at this number for Liberals in Quebec, how bad is that for the party?
Well, I mean, you know, we're fond of saying in politics that you don't look at any particular poll, like that's just a snapshot and it's that day or that week or whatever, that you look for trends. But there's no question that the trends are pretty bad right now for the Liberals. Like poll after poll shows them, you know, kind of behind and slipping further almost with every single poll. So it is bad. And you couple that with some of the problems that have been happening in the last, like what happened with the home heating stuff in the Atlantic. And, you know, just so many things are going wrong for them right now. So I think it's bad. And also I think that a lot of the hope that resides in the Liberal Party and caucus right now has been that Quebec will be there for them. And that doesn't look like it's going to be the case if this poll is more than just a snapshot and is actually portending some kind of a trend.
Yeah, absolutely. Tim, what would you say to that?
Well, a few things. Anne's trends point is a key one, and it's been a few months now that there's been at least a 10-point gap nationally and then regional breakouts. I would say, no offense against Mainstreet, because I would say it about our polling company, Abacus. I'll be interested to see what the Quebec-based pollsters say about what's happening in Quebec. But if ourselves and Mainstreet and others are right, the Liberals trailing in Quebec is a problem for them, because I think a lot of their math, this is also why you saw the carve-out in the Atlantic to getting re-elected, is holding what you can in the Atlantic Canada, beating everybody in Quebec, and then hoping you do well in some urban settings in Toronto and Vancouver and elsewhere. So, you know, it's just another series of things that Justin Trudeau has to figure out over the next number of months. Put out the usual caveat, we're still, well, Anne can tell us, but we're still probably a year to two away from an election. So it's not fatal, but it's not good.
Yeah, not good. And I do, you know, as Tim's talking about the math here, certainly the equation seems to become much harder to pull together for the Liberals if they cannot carry Quebec.
Well, I think it's a little soon to write off Quebec. As Tim points out, there is no election in the short term. I think we're at least a year out from an election. But Anne's right. The polls have been trending for the Liberals in a certain direction. I think there's time for a course correction. What I've seen this fall is caucus get pointier, question period get pointier, and I think you're going to see more of that. And I think there's quite a bit of pressure within caucus for those around the Prime Minister to allow things to get pointier. That means, I think, more aggressive campaigns, advertising campaigns, social media campaigns around Pierre Poilievre. I think we're hopefully going to see some of that. I know there are lots of people that would like that. So I think it's too soon to, you know, put a stake in anything at this point in time. I expect to see some change and some continued amped up. The other thing, too, is we've never had the benefit of an intense level of scrutiny on Mr. Poilievre. There's always a ton of scrutiny on the Prime Minister. People are familiar with him. People get tired of leaders over time, and government's 8 years in, it's a challenge. But I think you will see, as a greater microscope goes on to Mr. Poilievre, and he's forced to outline what some of his policies are, and people really go, oh yeah, who is that guy? You're going to see that gap close.
Yeah, although, you know, it's interesting you use the word policy, because certainly the Liberals are right now, you mentioned it with the Atlantic carve-out when it comes to the carbon tax. They face this challenge where, and this is just an example, on the one hand you see the Environment Commissioner saying you need to lean heavily on the carbon tax in order to get your environmental targets back on track, and up against that the calls to axe the carbon tax altogether. So is there a policy front where the Liberals might be able to turn the numbers around, do you think?
Well, how deep a policy discussion will there be in the next election, or will it be right down to, I like that guy, I don't like that guy, or I like that guy a little less than I like that guy? I mean, it's not a very sophisticated way to do it. I think there'll certainly be a climate change discussion on the next election. The Trudeau Liberals have always said it's about finding a balance between the economy and the environment. It was never about gutting one for the other. And so I think people are feeling a pinch. There's no question people have had a difficult amount of time. like I said, though, I think there's time to right the ship. I hope the Liberals find a message that appeals to people at their kitchen tables. But I do think, the likability of the leaders, whether that's the right thing or the wrong thing, will come into play come election day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, added to that, I think that's fair. I think there will be an analysis of the leaders, but chaotic versus coherent. I think that part of the reason the Liberals have slipped in the polls is they look chaotic on any number of fronts, fairly or unfairly. I think we've seen this in data. Like, one of the things that stood out for me in our poll, where Liberals were judging Justin Trudeau, was that they're not sure about his vision anymore. They're not sure where he's going. Now, that's not unusual for government 8 years in, but it is a problem if you're trying to say, for example, on climate change, the Liberals saying, well, we have a coherent plan. Well, do you now that you did this? So if you're eating away at your own credibility, and the other side, while not offering anything, at least appears to be coherent in what it's focusing on, i.e. affordability, that's another challenge. That's solved both by policy and disciplined focus on certain issues where you still have credibility.
Mm-hmm.
It is looking like this next election is going to be a change election, and that's probably bad news for the Liberals, and also potentially a referendum on them, and that's not good for an incumbent government. That's usually problematic if it's a referendum rather than a choice kind of election. But that said, I don't think you can write any major political party in this country out, and everyone has had their downs. I mean, Conservatives,
including with the current leadership.
Well, I mean, sometimes leadership does play a factor in it. But we've seen the Conservatives go down to 2 seats. We've seen the Liberals things went very badly in 2011. We've seen in my party, I've seen us with 13 seats. I've seen us with 103 seats. So you can't really write a political party out, even though they might have kind of some bad moments.
Mm-hmm. Some bad moments. But we're going to go into a break next week. Parliament's not sitting. We return. And then it becomes this very busy agenda, because we heard from Chrystia Freeland that on the 21st of November there will be the fall economic statement. Add to that pharmacare, because that, according to the supply and confidence agreement, something has to be passed before the end of 2023. And then Stephen Guilbeault talking about emissions cap as well as clean energy regulation. So very busy last few weeks of the 2023 session, arguably. So is there anything there that the parties might take advantage of or benefit for them rounding out the year? I'll begin with you, Susan.
You've listed a number of things. I definitely expect the cap on emissions to come out. I think near the end of November was what I was hearing on that. The Deputy Prime Minister will be doing the economic reset. I'm skeptical if pharmacare is going to get introduced and passed in the 5 weeks that will be left. That's a very, very big discussion, and I think that's something that shouldn't be rushed. We have to look at what we can afford as a country and what to do. It is part of the supply and confidence agreement with the NDP. It did say it was supposed to be passed by the end of the year. Mark Holland, the health minister, signaled that something was coming. I don't think it'll be by the end of the year. I think there's an opportunity that everybody will go home to their constituencies. They'll do their Remembrance Day ceremonies and honor the veterans, as we always do as Canadians. Come back, they'll have taken the temperature once again of their constituents, and I think it again will be the issues of affordability, the housing. The government's made progress and headway on that. It's still in the headlines, but not quite at the top. So movement, but not massive, I don't think, between now and the end of the year.
Okay, Tim?
Yeah, the reset thing is fascinating, right? If you go back to last spring, last March, I mean, that was going to be the first reset after the Liberals began the year not in a great place. And then we've had cabinet shuffle, and that was going to be a reset. And then we had the announcement on the Atlantic carve-out, and that was going to be a reset. I think the opposition parties will be watching to see if the government does get traction on FES, because the federal economic statement, because they haven't gotten it so far. I think the challenge in particular for the Conservatives is to be as disciplined as they can at the moment and still leave the ball in the court of the Liberals. That old military adage, when your opponent is making a mistake, don't interfere with it. The challenge, I think, Pierre Poilievre has, and perhaps the NDP as well, is not to overreach too much. You saw a little bit of that, I think, this week with the various motions on do you support home heating oil reduction or don't you? I think it was useful once. I'm not sure a series of them were. So discipline's a hard thing when you're in opposition parties, both opposition parties, feeling like we're almost there, we're almost there. But it shows how capable you could be should you ever become government.
Mm-hmm. And
Yeah, I mean, you're right. There's a very, very major agenda ahead of us, and I think it's only actually 4 sitting weeks, something like that.
Yeah, great. That's even
I think
faster.
it's
Right? Yeah.
So it's quite an agenda, and it's interesting to me how the economic statement, the fiscal economic statement, has now become almost like a budget.
Yeah.
I mean, it used to be just an update, but I mean, I remember it being just an update, but now it is almost like a budget, and so there are, high expectations, particularly on housing, I would say. So I think that I see some very late nights and some very tired MPs in the next few weeks.
And actually picking up on pharmacare, though, because again, in the letter of the supply and confidence agreement, something needs to be passed before the end of 2023. So what are you hearing on that?
Tell Michael he wants to break some news.
Are you
Anne.
going
He
to
wants to break
election,
some news.
Anne? I don't think so.
We're still friends, though, right?
What I will say, though, just like not on that, but you're right, that is in the agreement that the legislation has to be introduced and passed before the end of the year. But on the emissions cap, I will say that I think that that's going to be a bit of a push because I think that the Liberals do need to regain some of the credibility on the environmental front that they lost in the last week or so over the Atlantic exemption on carbon pricing.
Yeah, although look for pushback from Alberta, whatever comes out.
I'm not expecting to see tons and tons new programs, new initiatives in the Fez. I think they're going to hold a lot of that firepower for the budget. I think there may be 1 or 2 things, particularly related to housing, but I think the big stuff is in the budget. The finance minister is going to set the fiscal table for people so they understand what we're dealing with going forward and why the government has to do what it has to do.
Okay, well, we are watching I'll convene around the Fez with the 3 of you again. But for now, thank you, Anne. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.